Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. Today's video topic was inspired by a question that I got in the comments section of a previous video. The question was regarding the Duke of Buckingham as he appears as a character in the TV show The Tudors. The commenter was curious about just how fictitious this particular portrayal might have been. And the question got me thinking about this family as a whole and how they were, allegedly at least, a nest of traitors. But before we take a look at this, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to History Hit for sponsoring another video on this channel. History Hit has hundreds of programmes online, over 1,000 podcast episodes on their award-winning podcast network, and 5,000 history-related travel articles. And what's more, new content is being added all the time because they launch 15 new podcast episodes and 2 new programmes every week. Whilst Dan Snow's History Hit continues to be the world's leading history podcast, they also have 4 podcasts covering the ancients, warfare, gone medieval, and not just the Tudors, which is hosted by Susanna Lipscomb. This is in addition to Patented, Betwixt the Sheets, and their brand new podcast, American History Hit, which is releasing this month. History Hit is like Netflix, but for history. This week, I've been loving Hogarth, Into the Streets of Georgian London. Now, I think I've set my stall out, so to speak, pretty well on this channel. I am a firm believer in the value of visual culture for helping us to understand the past. Through the images produced, we can see the aspirations, concerns, and even horror of the artist and frequently of their community. For Georgian London, I'd argue, the go-to for this is William Hogarth. This programme is a fabulous exploration of his life and work. Click the link in my description box to find out more and to subscribe to History Hit. As an added bonus, my viewers are able to get 50% off your subscription for the next 3 months by using code Reading the Past. Thanks again to History Hit for sponsoring this video. And now, let's take a look at those traitor Dukes of Buckingham. The Dukes of Buckingham that we are going to be exploring today are the Stafford family, for whom this particular title was first created. Now, I have previously been asked to make a video on the various titles in the peerage, their significance and history, which I'd certainly be more than happy to do if the majority of people think it would be helpful. So do let me know what you think in the comments. The very first Duke of Buckingham was Humphrey Stafford. And as we can see from this beautifully crafted family tree, he was the son and heir of Edmund Stafford, 5th Earl of Stafford, by his wife Anne of Woodstock. Anne's grandfather was Edward III, and thus we see that the blood royal flowed through the veins of the Stafford family. Humphrey was born in 1402, probably in the December. When he was around 18, he would follow in the family tradition of accompanying his monarch into combat, because he would serve alongside King Henry V during his campaigns in France. This king would knight him on the 22nd of April, 1421. But just over a year later, Henry V would die, and he would leave behind him only a 9-month-old son, also called Henry. This infant was to be king after him. In the aftermath of this, Humphrey would occupy a prominent place on the royal council, while also continuing to serve the crown on the battlefields of France and, in later decades, of England too. His loyalty would be rewarded on the 14th of September 1444, when he was created 1st Duke of Buckingham. Around 2 decades before he obtained his dukedom, and by 1424, Humphrey would be married. His bride was Anne Neville. She was the daughter of Joan Beaufort. The Beaufort name, I'm sure, rings a bell. Joan was the legitimised daughter of Edward III's 3rd surviving son, John of Gaunt, by his mistress, Catherine Swynford. Thus, Humphrey, great-grandson of King Edward III, married Edward III's great-granddaughter, Anne. This couple would have 12 children, of which 7 would be sons. And of those 7 sons, 3 would survive into adulthood and would follow their father onto the battlefield. The noble houses of York and Lancaster both descended from King Edward III. For the time being, it was the Lancastrian King Henry VI who occupied the throne. But he would struggle with his mental health. It has been suggested that his spells of catatonia might have been caused by schizophrenia. Unfortunately, it would mean that, at points, he would be rendered unable to speak, much less to rule. The king's cousin, Richard, Duke of York, was prepared to fight for his right to be England's protector, and it wouldn't be long before he would also be suggesting that he might be a better option to be its monarch too. And thus the stage was set for the decades of conflict that would come to be known as the Wars of the Roses. At the start of this, Humphrey had tried to mediate, to find a compromise. But when this proved difficult, if not frankly impossible, he would back the Lancastrian cause, and he would remain steadfast in his support of the rule of Henry VI, and he would in fact act as his trusted bodyguard. So, although, as I may have mentioned at the top of this video, Humphrey's bloodline would play host to a few allegedly traitorous Dukes of Buckingham in the future, the first to hold that title would seemingly not be so besmirched. Nevertheless, his loyalty would not save his life, or indeed allow him to die peacefully in his bed. Humphrey would be killed on the 10th of July 1460 at the Battle of Northampton. He was 57 years old. His eldest son, also called Humphrey, had predeceased his father 2 years earlier in 1458. He left behind one very young son of his own, Henry Stafford. Little Henry would inherit the title of Duke of Buckingham when he was just 4 years old. He had been born on the 4th of September 1455. The first Duke of Buckingham's second surviving son was also called Henry, and he had married the young widow Margaret Beaufort in 1458, which made him stepfather to Henry Tudor, later King Henry VII. Somewhat confusingly, or perhaps more confusingly, the mother of Henry, 2nd Duke of Buckingham, was also called Margaret Beaufort. They were first cousins. Margaret Beaufort, Countess of Richmond and Derby, mother of King Henry VII of England, was the daughter of John Beaufort, 1st Duke of Somerset. Margaret Beaufort, Countess of Stafford, was the daughter of his brother Edmund, 2nd Duke of Somerset. Henry Stafford, 2nd Duke of Buckingham, was still a child when the Yorkist claimant took the throne as King Edward IV. This new king would marry Elizabeth Woodville in May 1464, and he would have her crowned in May 1465. At some point between this royal marriage and coronation, little Henry Stafford, who was aged around 10, would be married to the new queen's little sister, Catherine. For a while, it seemed that as this Henry Stafford grew into a man, his loyalty to the Yorkist rule of Edward IV and his heirs was every bit as unshakable as his grandfather's had been for the Lancastrians. Henry was already in possession of wealth and titles as a result of his Buckingham inheritance. But King Edward IV would see to it that he would be favoured further. Henry would be given responsibilities and precedence in the ceremonial, military and political life of England. He would be made a Knight of the Garter in 1474. However, there is some indication that Buckingham felt slighted in the later years of the reign, perhaps by the ascendancy of the Woodville faction at court and in the government. It has even been suggested that this is why he mostly stayed away from court and from public life during these years. And perhaps this animosity, jealousy, or distrust of his wife's family is what motivated Buckingham to stand beside King Edward IV's brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as he took custody and control of his nephew after the king's death on the 9th of April 1483. Because Buckingham would continue to support Richard as he went on to arrest the new king's other uncle, Anthony Woodville, 2nd Earl Rivers, and the new king's half-brother, Sir Richard Grey, The new young king, Edward V, was soon safely ensconced in the Tower of London, and before long he would be joined by his little brother Richard, Duke of Yorke. Buckingham, however, remained at Richard of Gloucester's side, as he had first William Lord Hastings and then Rivers and Grey executed for treason. In all three of these cases, it is suggested that any charges against the men were trumped up, and certainly none of them got a trial. Nevertheless, Buckingham continued to support Richard as his nephews were determined to be illegitimate. This was principally due to the allegedly bigamous nature of King Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville. And in the aftermath of this, which some claim was nothing more than a usurpation, Buckingham was happy to recognise Richard as King Richard III. In recognition of Buckingham's loyalty, the new king trusted him to supervise and govern Wales and the Marches, in addition to a number of other counties. He also set him to seek out treasons in London. Richard allowed Buckingham to fill the power vacuum that had been left by the execution of Hastings. Some even allege that Buckingham was the one who was truly responsible for the disappearances of the princes in the Tower. And the narrative on this varies as follows. Buckingham is the one who convinced Richard to have them killed. Buckingham had them killed without Richard's knowledge but for his benefit, or he had them killed for Henry Tudor's benefit, or indeed for his own benefit. With this last one, the implication is then that Buckingham intends to press his own royal blood into a rightful claim to the throne of England. Certainly, a few months after Richard III had claimed the throne, Buckingham's loyalty would switch, and in October 1483, Buckingham rebelled. Some have said that Buckingham's true, secret aim was for him to sit on the throne himself. However, it may also be the case that he truly wished to see Richard be replaced by Henry Tudor, who was the son of his former step-aunt, Margaret Beaufort. Henry Tudor, the plan then went, would marry Buckingham's niece by marriage, Elizabeth of Yorke. So, Buckingham does have a familial connection to both of these individuals. Is it perhaps beneficial to him to have them on the throne, and in his debt and gratitude, rather than to sit on the throne for himself? I guess we'd have to try and get inside of Buckingham's mind to figure out what he truly wanted. What did happen is that Buckingham rose up against Richard, unsuccessfully, as it would turn out. Indeed, in less than a month, he would be attempting to flee when he would be captured in Shropshire. Buckingham would ask to meet with Richard in person, but this request would be denied. Instead, Buckingham would be executed for treason without a trial, but by attainder, on November 2nd, 1483. By dying as an attainted traitor, Henry Stafford's lands and titles were now forfeit to the crown. As such, his widow and 4 surviving children would be reliant on Richard III's mercy for their future standing. The Dukedom of Buckingham was, for the time being at least, now defunct. However, less than 2 years after the execution of Henry Stafford, on the 22nd of August 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard III was killed, and Henry Tudor claimed his throne as King Henry VII. Within months, Henry Stafford's widow Catherine would marry the new king's uncle Jasper Tudor. Catherine's eldest son by her first husband, Edward Stafford, would attend Henry VII's coronation on the 30th of October 1485. Edward Stafford would be made a Knight of the Bath at this time. The next month, November 1485, saw his father's attainder be reversed, which in turn allowed him to inherit his lands and titles. He was now Edward Stafford, 3rd Duke of Buckingham. He was also only 7 when this occurred. Edward Stafford was made the ward of the new king's mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, and as such, she would have had oversight of his upbringing and his fortune. It is thought very likely that he was kept in her household. At age 11, in December 1489, Edward was married to Eleanor Percy, the eldest daughter of Henry Percy, 4th Earl of Northumberland. Henry Percy had been assassinated just a few months before this. Buckingham was made a Knight of the Garter in 1495. He would provide military service to his king against the army that had been raised by the pretender Perkin Warbeck in 1497. And then in 1498, he was allowed to take full possession of his inheritance. It is said that Buckingham made quite the impression at the wedding of Prince Arthur and Catherine of Aragon in 1501, both for his splendid clothing and for the martial prowess he displayed at the celebratory tournament. And this is the Buckingham who features in the TV show The Tudors. In 1509, he would be the one who served as Lord High Constable and Lord High Steward for the joint coronation of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. He would be present for Henry VIII's military assault on France in 1513, and at this time, Buckingham would lead 550 men. And then 7 years later, in 1520, Buckingham would be allowed to return with Henry for another great jaunt on the continent. This time, they would be going there, ostensibly at least, to celebrate a great peace at the Field of Cloth of Gold. This was an event where the flowers of the nobility of both England and France were in attendance. Being there was a sign of your elevated place and social prominence. With this in mind, I think it makes it all the stranger that Buckingham would die the following year as a convicted traitor. The speed of this fall seems startling. I mean, to be of the blood royal and to go from a place of wealth and prominence, albeit a place with relatively little real political influence, to the executioner's block within a year feels fast. Especially if we consider that this is 1520 to 1521. It's not the 1530s and beyond. So what happened? Well, Buckingham famously despised Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. It is said that he was particularly resentful of the political influence that a butcher's son from Ipswich was able to hold. And one story about Buckingham's fall goes that Wolsey, displeased by the Duke's continued acts and signs of disrespect, conspired, suborned and even bribed witnesses to generate evidence that could cast his enemy as a traitor and thus have him killed. And of course, Wolsey may certainly be the king's evil counsellor, someone who poisoned him against nobles like Buckingham for his very own purposes. I mean, after all, that would certainly absolve King Henry VIII from full culpability for his actions, wouldn't it? However, a letter of unknown date does exist, in which the king tells Wolsey, quote, "I would you should make good watch on the Duke of Suffolk, on the Duke of Buckingham, on my Lord of Northumberland, on my Lord of Derby, on my Lord of Wiltshire, and on others which you think suspect, to see what they do with this news." Frustratingly, just what this news refers to is also unknown to us. Clearly though, Henry VIII, at least at some point, must have mistrusted Buckingham and also Buckingham's brother, Humphrey Stafford, Earl of Wiltshire, among others, because he is asking Wolsey to, in effect, spy on them. Then, in 1519, a member of Henry's household, Sir William Bulmer, earned his monarch's ire by apparently wearing Buckingham's livery in the king's presence. The question then became, what had Buckingham potentially promised Bulmer? Also, if he had been able to usurp the king's place in the loyalty of one of his own servants, who else might this dangerous duke be able to call upon? Soon, Buckingham's enemies had witnesses who were prepared to denounce him. An estate official that Buckingham had dismissed, Charles Knivet, was one. Now, as a dismissed official, we can perhaps see how this individual might be accused of having a score to settle for himself. However, Knivet would be joined by others who were also prepared to testify to Buckingham's belief in his superior right to rule. A Carthusian monk named Nicholas Hopkins had allegedly since 1512 been prophesying on various matters regarding the future of the Tudor dynasty, and these prophecies would be listened to by the Duke. Hopkins was said to have seen that Buckingham would one day be the King of England. It was also said that Buckingham believed that the whole House of Tudor was accursed by God for their part in the execution of the Earl of Warwick in 1499, and allegedly this was the reason that Buckingham gave for Henry VIII not having produced a son to be the heir to his throne. Adding insult to injury, Buckingham's own son had been born in 1501, and he was thriving. It was also testified that the Duke had sought to increase his popularity and influence with the populace, and dangerously with the King's own guard as well. Buckingham's royal blood and his descent from King Edward III would, I think understandably, only serve to increase the perception of him as a potential threat to the crown. Just how much of the testimony that was generated against the Duke was in fact pure fantasy and fabrication is something that continues to be debated. What is not up for debate, however, is what happened next. Edward Stafford was arrested in the April of 1521. He was charged with treason on the 8th of May, put on trial on the 13th of May, found guilty on the 16th of May, and executed on the 17th of May. He would be posthumously attainted by Act of Parliament in 1523. This Act formally and legally disinherited his children, and thus Edward would be the last Stafford Duke of Buckingham. And the next people who would hold this title would be George Villiers and then his son, who was also called George, during the Stuart period. However, what Edward would not be was the last Stafford to find himself climbing up the scaffold steps towards the executioner's block, because his grandson Thomas Stafford would also meet that fate. Thomas's mother was Ursula Pole, who was the daughter of Lady Margaret Pole and thus the sister of Cardinal Reginald Pole. Margaret Pole was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence and Isabel Neville, so her paternal uncles were King Edward IV and Richard III. The Stafford royal bloodline was, through this union, thus further bolstered. Thomas Stafford had joined up with Sir Thomas Wyatt for his rebellion of 1554 during the early years of the reign of Queen Mary I. And despite being captured and imprisoned in the Fleet in the aftermath of this uprising's failure, Stafford was able to escape to France. However, he made the choice to return to England in April 1557, and at this point he claimed to be the rightful Duke of Buckingham. He also denounced Mary I's rule as, quote, unrightful. His calls for people to rise up in support of him, however, did go largely unheeded, and he was soon captured. He was put on trial and, unsurprisingly, found guilty of treason. He would be executed on the 28th of May, 1557. But what do you think? Was the Stafford family simply a nest of traitors? And if so, why? If not, though, why do we think they were so often suspected of it? Just how dangerous is royal blood and a proximity to the crown? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. Or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all of the places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so do consider following me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful, and if you did, why not consider sharing it with your friends? Please also let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now is a great time just to have a little check. Make sure that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you against your will. And while you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please also hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear so that YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded. I do hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.